What are the objectives of the US in the Russia-Ukraine war? If a ceasefire takes place, how and where and when would the US create problems for Russia in the future? So, what's the situation? Is the question? Give me a second. What's the objectives? Look, what are the objectives of the US? The How did the war start? First of all, the war happened because the US crossed Russia's red lines, which was a regime change operation in Ukraine. See, imagine Russia does a regime change operation in Canada or Mexico. Will the US tolerate it? They will never tolerate it. When the Soviets put missiles in Cuba, the Americans didn't tolerate it. Kennedy did not tolerate it. The Soviets had to pull the missiles out again. So when the US is so touchy about nations in its periphery, how can they expect Russia to tolerate any kind of nonsense in their periphery? So when the Americans did a regime change operation in Ukraine in 2014, the Euromaidan coup, that was a red line for Russia. That's why Russia immediately grabbed Crimea, which was anyway Russian territory. Okay. And then they have been systematically, essentially doing ethnic cleansing in the Donbas region. The Ukrainian government, the puppet government, for almost a decade, they did this. And that's why in 2022, the Russians eventually realized that now very soon the Ukrainians could become a NATO member state. So it's time to do something. So the Russians should actually have done this in 2014, but they did it in 2022. So the Americans knew that Russia will have to do something about this from a military perspective. They knew it. They were waiting for it. They induced Russia. They provoked and goaded Russia into doing this. So eventually, when this happened, the Americans took the opportunity to dump every imaginable sanction on Russia. And they thought that it would crush the Russian economy. They were so wrong. And the Russian economy has rebounded. It is now stronger than it was before, than in 2022. And it's growing at a rate that's higher than the European nations. So the objective was to crush Russia. It was to destroy Russia. And they thought that if the Ukraine war will go badly for Russia, then Russians will get frustrated with Putin and they will do a regime change operation, or they will overthrow Putin. And then we can take Moscow itself. So the objective was to destroy Russia, to defeat Russia, and to take over. The overall great dream is a regime change in Moscow. That's the great dream of the US. Okay. That's the deal. If a ceasefire takes place, how and where and when would the US create problems for Russia in the future? How do you create ceasefire? We'll see about that. How can the US create more problems for Russia in the future? Well, they've already created all the problems they can. They could perhaps then operationalize Poland and create trouble with Poland, perhaps. So you can always use a disposable vassal state to create more trouble for Russia. And before you operationalize Poland, you turn Poland into a military superpower, which is what's happening right now. It's happening quietly. But Poland is being turned into a military superpower in Europe, more powerful than Germany now. Okay? And at some point, I suppose they will operationalize Poland against Russia.